The room had gone completely silent. 37 engineers, 2 department heads, and a senior consultant from Montreal sat around a boardroom table on the 14th floor of Harwick Tower, staring at a financial projection model that had been broken for 6 days. 6 days of overtime, of cold coffee and shorter tempers, of a problem that was costing Harwick Capital an estimated $40,000 per hour in delayed decisions, and none of them could find it. Lawrence Harwick stood at the window with his back to the room. He was 41 years old, had built his investment firm from a single office in downtown Ottawa into one of the most recognized names in Canadian private equity, and he had not once, in 17 years, allowed a technical failure to sit unresolved for longer than 24 hours. He had a reputation. He had standards. And right now, standing in front of floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Ottawa River, he felt something he was not accustomed to feeling. Stuck. "Run it again," he said without turning around. Someone at the table exhaled. Someone else clicked a mouse. "Mr. Harwick," said Marcus, his chief financial analyst, carefully. "We've run it 11 times. The output is the same. There's a cascading error somewhere in the base assumptions of the third projection layer. But every time we isolate what we think is the source, it disappears. We can't. I didn't ask for an explanation of what you can't do, Marcus. I asked you to run it again." The room went quiet again. Outside in the hallway, a woman in a gray uniform was working her way down the corridor with a mop and a bucket. She moved slowly, methodically, the way people move when they have learned that rushing gets you nowhere and patience gets you everywhere. Her name was Adeline Bouchard. She was 29 years old, and she had been cleaning the 14th floor of Harwick Tower for 3 years, usually between 6 and 8 in the morning, long before most of the people inside those offices arrived. But today was different. Today there had been some kind of spill near the server room, and she had been called back in the middle of the afternoon. She wasn't supposed to be there. She didn't know that. She just pushed the mop forward, moved the bucket along the baseboards, and tried to stay out of the way of the people moving quickly in and out of the boardroom with the glass wall. The boardroom door was propped open with a doorstop. Someone had done it earlier to let the air circulate, and no one had bothered to close it since. Adeline paused outside the door, not to listen. She paused because there was a scuff mark on the floor just at the threshold, a dark rubber streak someone had left in a hurry, and she wanted to get it before she moved on. She crouched down, worked at it with a cloth from her apron pocket. From where she was crouching, she could see the screen projected on the far wall of the boardroom. She didn't mean to look at it, she really didn't, but she looked at it, and she saw it. She stood up slowly. She looked at the screen again. She looked down at the cloth in her hand. She looked back at the screen. She almost walked away. She almost picked up her mop and kept moving, because she knew how this would go. She had been in rooms like this before, in a different life. And she knew what happened when someone like her said something in a room full of people like them. But $40,000 an hour. She'd heard that part through the open door. She knocked on the door frame. Nobody looked up immediately. When they did, it was with the expression people reserve for interruptions they didn't ask for. "Sorry," she said. "I don't mean to bother anyone, but I think I can see what the problem is." The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence, not the silence of people thinking, the silence of people deciding whether to be polite or dismissive. Lawrence turned from the window. He looked at her the way he looked at most things, directly, without warmth, taking inventory. Gray uniform, cleaning cart in the hallway. Young, French-Canadian accent, hair pulled back under a cap. "Excuse me?" he said. "Your model," she said, and she pointed at the projected screen. "The third projection layer. The error isn't in the formula, it's in the reference cell. Column G, row 44. You've got a hard-coded value in there that's pulling the wrong base rate. Every calculation downstream is working perfectly. They're just all working from the wrong number." Nobody moved. Marcus turned to his laptop. He scrolled. He stopped. He looked up at Lawrence. "She's right," he said very quietly. "That's it. That's the whole thing." Lawrence Harwick looked at the woman in the gray uniform standing in his boardroom doorway, and for one of the very few times in his adult life, he did not know what to say. Her name was Adeline Bouchard, and she had a degree in actuarial science from the University of Waterloo that she had never finished. Not because she wasn't good enough. She had been better than good enough. She'd been one of the top students in her cohort, had a summer placement lined up with an insurance firm in Toronto, had been 2 semesters from completion, and then her mother had gotten sick. Not the kind of sick that gets better in a few weeks. The kind that requires someone to be home, to manage appointments and medications and insurance paperwork, and the 100 small bureaucratic nightmares that come with serious illness in a country that is excellent in theory and overwhelming in practice. Adeline had a younger brother who was 17 and didn't drive. She had no father in the picture. She had a mother who had spent 30 years working in a laundry facility and had never asked for anything from anyone. She went home. She told herself it was temporary. That was 5 years ago. By the time her mother stabilized, not recovered, stabilized, Adeline had a gap in her academic record, a gap in her employment history, and a set of skills that nobody was particularly interested in hiring for on a resume that looked, to most recruiters, like a story about someone who gave up halfway through. She hadn't given up. She had made a choice. There was a difference, but that difference was very hard to communicate in a 40-second phone screen, so she cleaned offices. She was good at it. She was reliable, she was fast, she was discreet, and she had a gift for organizing her routes so she could cover twice the floor space in the same amount of time as most of her colleagues. Her supervisor, a kind Haitian-Canadian woman named Bernadette, had told her 3 times that she had the mind of an engineer. "I know," Adeline had said. "That's the problem." She thought about numbers constantly. She couldn't turn it off. Walking past a whiteboard, she would spot an arithmetic error before she registered anything else about the room. Moving through offices where the screens weren't locked, she would catch a misaligned formula in a spreadsheet the way other people catch a typo. She had learned to keep moving, keep her head down. It was easier. She hadn't planned on saying anything in that boardroom, but she had said something, and now it was 3 days later, and Lawrence Harwick's executive assistant had called her personal cell phone. She still didn't know how they got the number, and asked her to come in for a meeting. She almost didn't go. She told Bernadette about it over a container of leftover pasta in the break room of a different building they were cleaning that evening, and Bernadette had pointed a fork at her and said, "Adeline, you go. You always talk about doors. That's a door. Open it." "It's not a door," Adeline said. "It's a curiosity. Rich people get curious about you. It doesn't mean they respect you. It means you're interesting for a minute. Maybe. But maybe not. Either way, what do you lose?" Adeline knew the answer to that. She had been losing small pieces of herself for 5 years. Her confidence, her momentum, the easy assumption she'd had at 22 that her life was going somewhere specific. She wasn't sure she could afford to lose the small, stubborn kernel of dignity she had managed to hold on to. But she went. Lawrence's office on the 14th floor had a view of the Gatineau Hills. It was decorated with the kind of expensive restraint that signals more money than flair. Clean lines, original artwork, no family photos. Adeline noticed all of this immediately and filed it away, because noticing things was something she did the way other people breathed. He stood when she came in, which she had not expected. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Mrs. Bouchard, thank you for coming." "You're welcome," she said, and sat down without any visible sign of being intimidated, though her heart was going at a pace she found embarrassing. He sat. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Where did you learn to read a financial projection model?" She told him. The short version. Waterloo, actuarial science, her mother's illness, the decision to leave. She kept her voice even. She was not going to perform her hardship for him. He listened without interrupting, which was something she noted. Men like him. She had met the type before, briefly, in lecture halls and placement offices, usually interrupted. Usually filled the silence with their own observations before you had finished making yours. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You could see the error from a doorway," he said. "While you were cleaning, the model was projected on a full wall. It wasn't difficult to see. My analysts had been looking at that model for 6 days. They were looking too closely," she said. "When you're too close to something, you stop seeing the shape of it. You only see the pieces." Lawrence looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not quite respect. Something earlier than that. Recalibration, maybe. "I'd like to offer you a contract position," he said. "Junior analyst, 3 months, with the option to extend if it goes well. The salary would be," he named a number. Adeline kept her face still, but something shifted in her chest. That was more than she had made in the last year and a half combined. "I haven't finished my degree," she said. "I know. I had your background checked before I called you. I don't particularly care about the degree. I care that you saw in 30 seconds what 37 people missed for 6 days." He paused. "I'd also suggest you look into finishing through correspondence. Waterloo has a program. But that's your business, not mine." She looked at him. She was trying to find the catch. There was always a catch. But his expression was not the expression of someone setting a trap. He looked, actually, like someone who had made a decision and was waiting to see if she would make one too. 3 months, she said. 3 months, and I keep my current position until the end of the first month. I'm not leaving Bernadette short-staffed while she figures out coverage. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, something adjacent to surprise. That's fine, he said. She was very good at the job. This surprised nobody who actually knew her and surprised everyone at Harwick Capital who had only known her as the woman with the mop. She had a particular talent for seeing the structural problems in complex models. Not just the arithmetic errors, but the logical ones. The places where an assumption had been made so early in the construction of a model that everyone downstream had simply absorbed it as fact without examining it. She worked quietly. She didn't socialize much. She ate lunch at her desk or in a small courtyard on the south side of the building where there was a concrete planter someone had filled with marigolds. Lawrence noticed. He noticed more than he intended to. He told himself it was professional interest. She was, genuinely, the most technically precise thinker on his junior team, and he had been in this business long enough to recognize something real when he saw it. He had built his career on that ability. He was not going to confuse it with something else. He confused it with something else. It started with the conversations. He had a habit of walking the floor in the late afternoon, a management style his team called the rounds, and he had a further habit of stopping when he saw something interesting. He stopped at her desk more than was strictly necessary. They talked about models, about methodologies, about the differences between actuarial and investment risk frameworks. She argued with him regularly. Not aggressively, she wasn't combative. But she held her positions when she had evidence for them, and she released them when she didn't. And Lawrence, who spent most of his professional life surrounded by people who agreed with him out of self-interest, found this genuinely disorienting. She never asked him for anything. That was the other thing. In his experience, everyone wanted something. Advancement, access, approval. Adeline Bouchard seemed primarily interested in getting the work right. One evening in the 3rd month, they ended up being the last 2 people in the building. A deadline on a portfolio review had stretched into the evening. The rest of the team had gone home at 6:30 with his blessing, and at 9:15 he walked past her desk and found her still at her screen with a cold cup of tea and 3 pages of handwritten notes spread across her keyboard. "Go home, Adeline," he said. 20 minutes, she said, without looking up. "You've been saying that for an hour. I heard you say it at 8. She looked up. She noticed that he was still in his jacket, still had his tie properly done despite the hour. "You're still here too," she said. "I own the building. That doesn't mean you need to be in it at 9:15 on a Thursday." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, which surprised him somewhat, "Do you want to get dinner? There's a place on Spark Street that's still open." She looked at him. "Is this a work dinner?" she asked. Her voice was careful. "No," he said. "It's dinner." She was quiet for a moment. She closed the document she'd been working on. She picked up her handwritten notes, tapped them into a tidy stack, and set them aside. "Okay," she said, "but I'm not splitting the bill." He laughed. It was so unexpected, for both of them, that for a moment they just looked at each other. "I'll pay," he said. "Obviously. I know you'll pay. I meant I'm not splitting it with you. You're paying the whole thing." He laughed again, and they went to dinner. There was a woman named Sylvie Archambault. She was 36, worked in corporate law, had known Lawrence for 8 years, and had been operating for the last 2 of those years, under the not unreasonable impression that they were heading somewhere. Not because he had said so. He hadn't. But he had taken her to events, to dinners, to his family's cottage on Lake Joseph, and she was not the kind of woman who continued that kind of investment without some expectation of return. She heard about Adeline from someone at a charity gala, said as a piece of offhand gossip that was meant to be amusing. "Can you imagine, the cleaning lady? Now she's an analyst." Now apparently Lawrence takes her to dinner, and Sylvie, who was very controlled, had set down her glass of wine very carefully and said, "How funny," and changed the subject. She called Lawrence the next morning. "I hear you've been spending time with someone from your office," she said. "I have," he said. There was a pause. "Someone you hired from the cleaning staff." "She was working in building services, yes. She has a strong actuarial background. Lawrence, Sylvie, do you understand how this looks?" He was quiet for a moment. "I understand how it looks to people who measure things by how they look. That is almost everyone, I know," he said. "I used to be one of them." The conversation ended shortly after that. Sylvie, who was perceptive and self-aware, spent about 48 hours being angry and another 24 hours acknowledging that she had been holding on to something that had never been fully offered. She didn't call him again. She was too proud for that, and Lawrence, honestly, was a little relieved, and then felt guilty about being relieved, and then had coffee with Adeline and forgot about the guilt. The thing about Adeline was that she never pretended. She didn't pretend to be comfortable in spaces where she wasn't comfortable. She didn't pretend to be unimpressed by things that impressed her. She didn't pretend that the distance between where she'd come from and where she currently was. Sitting in board meetings, contributing to reports that shaped the movement of significant amounts of money, was a small distance. It wasn't. She had crossed it on her own, slowly, and she was allowed to notice that. And she didn't pretend that her feelings about Lawrence were simpler than they were. They were complicated. She liked him, genuinely, increasingly, in ways that made her nervous because she had very carefully not liked anyone for a long time. He was sharper than she'd expected. He was funnier than he showed in professional settings. He was capable of real kindness, though he deployed it privately and would have been embarrassed to have it observed publicly, which she found both frustrating and humanly understandable. But he moved through the world with a certainty about his own place in it that she had never had and suspected she never would. He had never had to justify his presence in a room. He had never had to consider whether something he said would be received differently because of who he appeared to be. He didn't know what it was like to be looked through, and she wasn't sure he would fully understand it, even if she tried to explain. She tried to explain, once, over dinner, a real dinner this time, at a restaurant she had actually been to before and liked, not one he'd chosen, and he listened. He listened the way he had in the office on that first day, without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "I didn't see you the way you think I saw you. You looked right past me," she said. "Initially," he said. "Initially is what matters," she said. "That's the impression you make before you've had a chance to perform. That's the real one." He was quiet. "I can't unhear that," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm just saying it so you know." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm grateful you said it," he said, "even though it's uncomfortable." She smiled a little. "You're better at being uncomfortable than you look." The 3-month contract ended. He offered her a permanent position. She took 2 weeks to decide. She was completing an independent study module through Waterloo. She had her mother's medication schedule to reconsider now that she had a stable income. She had 37 small things to reorganize. And then she said yes. Her mother, Céline, was a small woman with her daughter's eyes and the particular dry humor of someone who had seen enough of life to find most of it slightly absurd. She met Lawrence exactly once before she formed a complete opinion of him. He had driven Adeline home after a work event and had walked her to the door, and Céline had opened the door before they knocked because she had seen them from the window, and she had looked at Lawrence for about 4 seconds and said to Adeline, in French, "He's nervous." "He's not nervous," Adeline said. "His hands," Céline said. Lawrence, who had taken 2 years of French in secondary school and understood perhaps 30% of this, said carefully, "Bonsoir, Madame Bouchard." Céline looked at him. "You drove my daughter home." "I did. She doesn't need driving. She's very capable." "I know," he said. "I work with her. I'm aware." Céline considered this. Then she said, "Would you like coffee?" It was 10:30 at night. He said yes. He stayed for an hour and a half. Céline asked him sharp questions about his business and his family and what he thought he was doing, which she phrased more diplomatically than that but which Lawrence understood exactly. He answered honestly. He surprised himself by how honestly he answered. When he left, Céline looked at Adeline and said, "He respects you." "I know," Adeline said. "That's not nothing." That's actually quite a lot. It was a Thursday afternoon in late November when the story in the building finally became a story outside it. Harwick Capital was hosting its annual portfolio review, a gathering of clients, investors, and industry contacts in the firm's event space on the 16th floor. Adeline was presenting for the first time a section of the risk analysis framework she had developed and that had, in the 4 months since its implementation, reduced modeling error by 23%. She knew some people in the room knew who she was. Not Adeline Bouchard, analyst. The other story. She had heard it twice in the elevator in the weeks leading up to the event. The version that made her sound like a curiosity rather than a professional. The punchline version where the cleaning lady saves the day. She had not said anything about it. She had prepared her section of the presentation with the same methodical attention she gave everything else, and she had decided she would simply be better than the story. She was. She presented for 12 minutes. She was clear and direct, and took 3 questions from the room with the particular calm of someone who has done the work and knows it. When she was done, there was a beat of silence, and then genuine applause, not polite applause, actual applause, from people who didn't know who she was beyond what she had just shown them. She sat down. Across the room, Lawrence caught her eye. He didn't nod or smile. He just looked at her for a moment with an expression she had learned over months to read correctly. He was proud of her. He didn't need to perform it. He just was. Later, during the reception, a senior partner from a Vancouver firm approached her and said he understood. She had identified a significant structural error in a model under considerable time pressure, which led to a 20-minute conversation about methodology that she found genuinely enjoyable. Near the end of the evening, Lawrence appeared at her elbow. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she agreed. That Vancouver conversation looked intense. He had good questions. "He's going to try to hire you." She glanced at him. "Is that why you came over?" "No," he said. "I came over because I wanted to." She looked at him for a moment. The room was loud and bright around them, full of the particular energy of professional events winding down, people loosening slightly, conversations shifting registers. "Lawrence," she said. "Adeline," he said. "Ask me properly," she said. He looked at her, a long moment. The corner of his mouth moved. "Have dinner with me. Not a work dinner, not dinner near the office after a long Thursday. Actual dinner, on a Saturday, somewhere you choose. Because I want to spend time with you outside of all of this, and I would have said so sooner, but I was being careful." "Why were you being careful?" "Because I didn't want to get it wrong," he said. She nodded once. "Saturday," she said. "There's a place in the Glebe I like. We'll go there." "Okay," he said. "And Lawrence, yes, you didn't get it wrong." He let out a breath very quietly, and she thought, not for the first time, that Lawrence Harwick, behind all of that certainty he moved through the world with, was quietly more uncertain than he appeared, and that this, more than almost anything else, was what she trusted about him. They stood in the bright, loud room together for a moment, not speaking. Outside the tall windows, Ottawa in November was bare trees and early dark, and the first suggestion of snow in the clouds, which Canadians recognize the way other people recognize rain. It was, in its way, a beginning. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that announces itself loudly. The quiet kind, the kind that has been building for a while before either person is ready to name it. The kind that tends to last.